And as the players begin to return to your training facilities, Simon, obviously you're experiencing that a little bit now, and you've all, Jesse and Lisa touched on how you're doing it in a remote setting. But as they begin to return, is there any sort of important technologies or methods or tools that you'll be looking to implement to assess your players? And more specifically, how do these indicators from a physical or even cognitive perspective maybe differ from your general pre-season or in-season indicators, if at all?
I think in the AFL's context, as you said, we'd finished our pre-season and we started one game. So I think front of our mind was they'd had 17 weeks of training before we went into isolation. And then in 8 weeks of isolation, as I said, we continued to train. We did a month of a real volume or accumulation type period where we backed off the intensity, but, maintained pre-season volumes. And in the final 4 weeks, we really intensified the training program to have closer demands to what they're going to do when they come back to us. So they've got 25 weeks of training behind them as they step back into the doors. So for us, really, we didn't have the time, and we couldn't, it's very hard to justify a standardized fitness test on return. So what we did was indirect assessment. And so we're looking at what intensities are the players training at during football drills, where we know what the normative reference values are for each player or positional groups and what they should be outputting in that drill. Common, no-brainers. We're looking at the visual signs. What's their body language like during the session? Are they dropping off throughout the session? How do they recover? We're looking at some of their heart rate data whilst we do some off-legs training, on the bike or other. And then really importantly, we're having detailed conversations with them, and that's primarily how we approach it at this point. And how did your program go? What did you do? What couldn't you do? What were your biggest challenges, etc. And so I think, my main point on this, and I've seen a lot in social media in the last few days, is around ramping up training. And I think the side of the coin that's been missed is, you've got to have some trust in your players that they've done the program. As Jesse said, the guys in the NBA are getting paid huge money. The AFL guys get paid pretty well also. It's their job to turn up in shape, knowing that we're going to get back into football training, and they knew that they'd be playing within 3 to 4 weeks. So there's an enormous trust on the players here.
Yeah, I think, Simon, you kind of nailed it there. I mean, I think the AFL and the NRL, they're a couple of weeks ahead of us in terms of returning to the facility. I mean, we haven't mandated any sort of return just yet, but we assume it's probably coming shortly in the next, 2-3 weeks or so. But I guess, James, to answer your question in terms of the tech and all that sort of stuff, it absolutely plays a role when we want to be objective in terms of what they were before they left, given that we were, 2/3 through the way of our season. So we can compare to those numbers. But again, Simon, you nailed it in the sense that, how are these guys feeling when they get back and we start doing some scrimmages, some game-like drills, and we can match up the objective values to game values and practice values and all these things as well. But, it's all well and good if those metrics align, and it's great to tick that box. But, if they're really struggling through that, then that's probably something we need to address. And conversely, if they're feeling great, well, that's a great sign to progress.
Yeah, on that, I agree with both the lads. You're coming back into a period where it's accelerated. It's accelerated training, and you're just basically trying to do everything you can to prepare for games. So one of the big things for me, and I'm sure for the boys as well, is you never want to apply testing at the expense of quality training, and that's the most important thing. So whether it's a yo-yo or a beep test or whatever the hell you're doing on pitch, whether it's repeated sprint efforts, you don't want to perform those testing procedures at the expense of quality training. And you really have to turn around and ask yourself, why am I actually testing in the first place? So unless you can answer that question, then you're just collecting data for the sake of it. And that's one of the most important things. And I think we're all guilty of it. We can occasionally just throw out a test and then collect data and actually not use that data. So one of the big things for us is knowing that the talk now is that we've got a 4-week period to prepare for an additional 4-week period where we've got potentially 8 games to play. So for us, it comes down to not testing, but rather just making sure that our programming is correct. Probably the one thing I would say, and similar to what Simon was alluding to, whilst we probably won't have many standalone on-field tests. What we'll do is we'll use our drill profiling to look at their output in a particular drill, and then match that with their RPE and heart rate. So how are you responding? How much time have you actually spent in your red zone? How much? What's your RPE for a given drill? And what was it previously? So this was your output before you broke away. This is your output today. Your response to that output, both at the time and also the days following, and that comes through to communication and wellness questionnaires and whatnot. How is it perceived? And if it's perceived as though, wow, that was actually significantly more intense than what it was pre-breakaway, then we know that these players are deconditioned. And I mean, that's obvious, but it at least allows you to periodize and actually get some hard data week to week without necessarily doing some standalone testing. So if you're repeating a drill week to week and you're periodizing it and you're finding the RPE to that, the perceived exertion for that drill is less and your heart rate response is better, including the recovery curve, then you know that your players are, they're improving. Probably the one other thing I'll add to that is we will do some off-field testing, and that's mostly things that are not going to interfere with their ability to train. So it might be something like we just want to have a look at their, how far off they are with their CMJ. So we use a jump mat for that. We'll do some like reactive strength index testing, some single leg triple hop, and just get a gauge of that. We want to know, the amount that the amount of decrement since going away, but also then be able to turn around to the coaching staff and say, okay, this particular athlete is probably not done much in time off and may represent a greater risk upon returning to a game every 3 days.